The year is 1919. The Great War, the war to end all wars, is finally over. Millions of men are coming home, leaving behind the mud, the gas, and the constant thunder of artillery. For many, it's a triumphant return to a world they fought to protect. But for one man, let's call him Thomas, the return home wasn't a triumph. It was the beginning of a new, silent war, one fought not in the trenches of France, but in the quiet streets of his own hometown. Thomas had enlisted in 1915, a young man full of patriotic fire, eager to do his bit. He saw action at the Somme, endured the hell of Passchendaele, and survived the final German offensives. He was gassed twice, wounded by shrapnel, and watched friends he'd known his whole life disappear in the blink of an eye. He learned to sleep through the sound of shelling, to function on near-starvation rations, and to live with the constant companionship of death. He was a survivor, a hero, at least that's what everyone told him. When the armistice was signed, a strange quiet fell over the battlefield. The silence was deafening, more unsettling than the loudest bombardment. It was a silence he carried home with him, folded neatly in his uniform, along with his medals. Back in his English village, everything looked the same, but felt completely different. The church bells rang, children played in the streets, and people went about their daily lives. They greeted him with smiles and pats on the back, calling him a hero. They wanted to hear stories of bravery and victory. But how could he explain the smell of gas, the sight of a man cut down by machine gun fire, or the gnawing terror of a night raid? The words wouldn't come. The experiences were locked away, too monstrous for polite conversation over tea. So he stayed silent. He tried to slip back into his old life. He went back to his job at the local mill, the rhythmic clatter of the machinery a poor substitute for the familiar chaos of the front. But the world he had known was gone. He felt like a ghost, haunting his own life. His fiancée, Mary, tried to reach him. She held his hand, her eyes full of love and concern, but she couldn't understand. How could she? She hadn't seen what he'd seen. Her world was still bright and whole. His was shattered into a million pieces. At night, the war came back for him. The silence of his bedroom would be broken by the phantom screams of the wounded. The smell of his mother as cooking would suddenly turn into the sickly, sweet stench of chlorine gas. A car backfiring in the street would send him diving for cover, his heart pounding in his chest. He would wake up drenched in sweat, the mud of the trenches seemingly caked under his fingernails. He was no longer in Flanders, but Flanders was very much still in him. The doctors of the time had a name for it, shell shock, but they didn't really understand it. They saw it as a weakness, a failure of moral fiber, not a legitimate injury. Some treatments were crude, even cruel. Others simply recommended a stiff upper lip and getting on with it. Thomas was told he was lucky to be alive, that he should be grateful. And he was, but gratitude couldn't quiet the voices in his head or calm the shaking in his hands. He started avoiding people. The cheerful chatter of the pub felt like an assault. The questions from well-meaning neighbors felt like interrogations. He found solace in long, solitary walks through the fields, the quiet of nature, a temporary balm. But even there, the rustle of leaves could sound like the stealthy approach of an enemy patrol. He was a prisoner of his own mind, his memories, the bars of his cell. His relationship with Mary began to fray. He grew distant, irritable, lost in a fog she couldn't penetrate. "What's wrong, Thomas?" she would ask, her voice gentle. "Talk to me." But he couldn't. He felt ashamed of his fear, of his inability to be the man he was before the war. He was a hero in their eyes, but he felt like a coward, broken and useless. He started drinking. The temporary numbness it offered a welcome escape from the relentless replay of his worst moments. One afternoon, he was walking by the river, the same river where he and his friends had swum as boys. He saw a group of children playing, their laughter echoing across the water. For a moment, a flicker of his old self returned. But then, One of the boys threw a rock into the water, and the sudden splash sent a jolt of pure terror through him. It wasn't a rock, it was a grenade. It wasn't a river, it was a flooded shell crater. The children's laughter turned into the screams of his dying comrades. He stumbled back, gasping for air. The idyllic scene transformed into a battlefield nightmare. That was the breaking point. The silence he had been fighting had finally won. It had isolated him, consumed him, and convinced him that he was utterly alone. He had survived the enemy's shells, but he couldn't survive the echoes they left behind. Thomas's story is not unique. It's a composite, drawn from the real-life accounts of countless veterans. After World War I, thousands of men returned home not to peace, but to a private, lonely hell. The term shell shock eventually evolved into what we now know as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. We understand now that these are not moral failings, but genuine, profound injuries to the mind, inflicted by unimaginable trauma. The silence that haunted Thomas was the silence of misunderstanding, the silence of a society that celebrated its heroes but didn't know how to heal them. It was the silence of being unable to share an unbearable burden. His war didn't end in 1918. It simply changed location. Key survived the trenches, the gas, and the shelling. Key, but he couldn't survive the silence that followed. Today, we have a much greater understanding of mental health and the invisible wounds of war. But the struggle continues for veterans of every conflict. The most important lesson from stories like Thomas's is the power of listening. The power of creating a space where stories, no matter how difficult, can be told without judgment. The opposite of that devastating silence isn't noise, it's connection, it's understanding. It's ensuring that no one who serves has to fight their final, hardest battle alone. If you or someone you know is struggling, please remember that help is available and you are not alone. There are resources and people who want to listen. Reaching out is a sign of incredible strength. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more content that explores the human side of history.